Okay, I think we're live. I'm hoping this is working okay. If anybody is here and or in the chat, please let me know. Here and or in the chat, please let me know. Let me kill that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I just heard like an echo there.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's just go for it. So I am going to say, welcome everybody. John, welcome back to the channel. And it has been a week. It has been a 7-day anniversary for the new Maiden Senjutsu. The album is out. And together we're going to give our basic review or in-depth review. We're just going to go down the review yard here and talk about it. I wanted to give it a week and let the album be digested a little bit. And John, I think you pretty much agreed to that too. You know, there's, I know we kind of talked about this briefly, but I just want to throw this out there, and I'm not out to throw anybody under the bus or anything like that. But the day this album released, YouTube went ballistically nuts with reviews. Hey, Jeff, good. I'm glad you commented, bro. Thanks for letting me know you are seeing this. Okay. YouTube went nuts with people posting reviews and rating it in the discography and whatnot, all on the day the album released. And I don't see how you can really do that legitimately or honestly, but that's just me. So that's why it's taken us a week to get to it so we can digest the album thoroughly. So, John, what do you think about that? Did you notice that too or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did do a review of it on the first day on my channel, but I did preface it, and that wasn't my intention. My intention was...
You made that clear. You made that very clear.
My intention, my thought process was, all right, typically with this era of Iron Maiden, I have to give multiple listens. I got to sleep on it a bunch of times for it to really start to sink in. And what happened for me was I went out and I listened to the album on streaming. My vinyl hasn't shown up yet. So I listened to it on Amazon Music, lossless, and just went for a long walk and listened to the album from beginning to end. And I was personally so excited about it that I thought, you know what, I want to capture, as I put it in my video, my Christmas morning review, which is my first thoughts, first feelings. I knew that I wasn't going to catch that again. This is the first time I've listened to the album. I wanted to put down on tape or, you know, on video, my thoughts there so that I could go back at some, because how often do you know, when you think about all these how many Iron Maiden albums, it's 17 Iron Maiden albums at this point, right? It's hard to remember what you thought about Peace of Mind the first time you heard it, or what you thought about, you know, Somewhere in Time the first time you heard it. So I wanted to capture that, and I prefaced my video with that, hey, this is first review, initial thoughts. I did not want to do, I agree with you, we were talking about this before we started, that people that were already ranking it amongst all the other Iron Maiden albums, that to me seemed a little bit like, how can you possibly do that? The album's only been out for 8 hours at this point, and you're already, you know, you're already like making comparisons to the older albums and everything. And with where Iron Maiden is at, you know, at this point in their career, that the types of albums that they're putting out, they're albums that are meant to be, we're going to probably say this a lot, this new progressive, you know, phase of the band. They're albums that are meant to be listened to multiple times. There's a lot going on. It's a long album. It's 82 minutes. There's a lot going on in these songs. So they're really, I think as time goes on, here we are 7 days out from it. My opinion has moved in slightly different directions with certain things on this record. And I'm sure if you talk to me a month from now or 7 months from now, it may shift a little bit more, just like it has done with, for instance, Book of Souls. You know, my opinion on that, the last Iron Maiden album has changed over time. And I think I'm sure the same thing will happen with this one. But I was struck by how much I liked it right out of the right out of the gate on first listen. And I just thought, you know what, I want to catch this. I want to catch this Christmas morning, you know, so excited, throwing the wrapping paper all over the place. New Iron Maiden, woo! You know, just like, you know, that youthful excitement where I'm not going in and I wasn't super analyzing any of the songs because I couldn't. I had only heard them once, you know, besides the advanced singles. So,
right. And you know what's funny is I remember when Book of Souls came out, I was not as jazzed about it as I was this one. And I think with that is because with this one, there was not a lot of pre-hype. There was not a lot of notification that this was going to drop. Okay, so it was kind of a surprise. You know, there was a lot of rumors that they were working on an album. Even when they were on tour last time, you know, word in the fandom community, we kind of knew they were doing something, but we weren't sure if it was actually going to come true or not. So there was not a lot of pre-hype for this album to drop, as well as after the incredibly screwed up year we've had in the world. It was just, I think, such a welcomed surprise that really got the juices flowing again for me. And I'm definitely, now that I have digested the album, what I will open up by saying is what this album kind of reminds me of is the way I felt with Brave New World and Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. And that is, I kind of had that initial, listening to the album as a whole, I have almost the same initial impression by it, and knew from that first impression how it was going to grow. I just kind of knew, I'm like, I see kind of where this is going. Yes, it sounds a little different, just like those albums did, right? When Seventh Son came out, you know, even though we had Somewhere in Time with keyboards and whatnot, Seventh Son had a new sound for Maiden, to me anyway. It was a different sound. And yet, that album grew on me quick within a week. You know, it grew on me quick. Same thing with Brave New World. And I'm putting this album kind of right with those two. I kind of said the same thing. I threw a video up the day it came out. I had picked, you know, I said at this point, the two favorite tracks I have, initial favorite tracks, was Into the World and the title track. And that's actually changed now. So that just goes to show, you know, how if you give it some time and you give some things some listens, your headspace around the album falls into its groove, you know?
Yeah.
And I think every fan is going to be different. This is one thing that I've definitely noticed. This album is already all over the place. There are people that hate it. There are people that, you know, and that's how it is with every single Iron Maiden record. Their fandom is too big. They are too big. They are one band trying to make an album to appease millions of fans. It's never going to happen. Right.
Yeah, and I think, well, to go back for a second, I wanted to comment on, you talked about how the album, it felt like the announcement for this album came out of nowhere, and it was like, whoa, the album just showed up. And I was even caught off guard with, you know, I was like, on like a Wednesday, I looked and was like, whoa, the new Iron Maiden album comes out in 2 days. Like it felt like it came on so quickly, which I think was good. And also the way they led up to it with the whole Belshazzar's feast and like they were hinting at things, it kind of kept everybody engaged.
Scavenger hunt kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like people were trying to read into different things on that, like, you know, Belshazzar's feast poster, and the writing on the wall video had a lot of like Easter eggs in it and stuff. And
there's a lot of conspiracy theories.
Yeah, and it kept, and which is cool. You know, I just made a video on my channel just like 2 days ago about is the mystery and mystique in music gone. And I brought up Iron Maiden, that, you know, in this day and age of the internet where everybody knows what everybody else has eaten for breakfast today, it's very hard to create any sort of sense of excitement and wonder and mystery. And I think that they were able to do that a little bit with the whole Belshazzar's Feast, not leaking this. It wasn't like they were talking about up to this album for months on end. You know, this KK's Priest album, I did a video on that, and I know this isn't their fault. I think it's the album's been delayed a bunch of times, but they've put out 4 advanced singles from that album, and it just seems like it's been hanging around so long now that any kind of enthusiasm and momentum for it, I can't help but think that it, you know, slowed it. Yeah, it slowed it down a little bit because it's been delayed and it's just been sort of hanging there. But to your point about, you know, Iron Maiden and the fans, I think that Iron Maiden I really respect them for this, that this whole phase of the band, and you'll hear me refer to this, anybody who watches my videos now hears me say this, the Rob era of the band, the Return of Bruce era, Brave New World on. They really seem like they're doing what they want to do now. They're not, I mean, Iron Maiden always did what they wanted to do. They were never like a band that followed trends or anything. But what I mean by that is that this is where they are at this point in their life right now. They're not trying to, you know, put out an album that tries to cash in on old glories and sound like something from the 80s. They're not throwing darts at the wall trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. I just really get the feeling that this is where they're at now. This is the type of music they want to make. It's genuine. It's sincere. Of course, they're aware of the Iron Maiden legacy and, you know, what the fans expect from them, but they're doing what they want to do. And I can feel that through the music, that this is really coming from them, inside them. It's not contrived. It's not them trying to cash in on something or trying to see if this works and throw this against the wall, see if it sticks. You know, it's kind of a complaint I've had of Judas Priest, is that Judas Priest, they sort of maneuver around, like you get Nostradamus, which is an album that I actually like. But then it's like, whoops, that didn't work. So let's go back to an album that sounds like, you know, Painkiller or whatever. You know, they're always they play it a little bit. Judas Priest feels like they're playing it a little bit safe for me. Whereas Iron Maiden, this is what they want to do. They're pushing themselves. They're pushing themselves musically and creatively. And you're getting an album that, and in my video, I said this right from the beginning. I said, look, because when I did the videos on the advanced singles, I got 3 types of comments. This is Iron Maiden. Everything they do is beyond criticism. How dare you say anything about anything? You know, how dare you criticize Iron Maiden? The second group of people were maybe the people that were more in the middle, like, you know, I like it, but it's, you know, I'm in the middle on it. And then there were the people that were like, everything after 1988 sucks. You know, they just won't even try. And so I said to people, if you don't like the last 4, the Return of Bruce albums since Brave New World, if you don't like any of that stuff, you're probably not going to like this album. If you're expecting Peace of Mind or Number of the Beast, you're not going to get that. I encourage people to give it a try, because there's a lot of things to really like about where Iron Maiden is at this point in their career. Yes, it's different. No, it's not Iron Maiden from the 80s. It's a different thing. It's still Iron Maiden. There's still lots to love there. There's still lots to discover and enjoy. And when you really embrace this era of the band, I think it's fun. It's cool. I respect them and admire them for where they're at right now, doing what they're doing. They go out on tour. They play the songs from the albums. I know they do they alternate, like, you know, classic type themed tours with, ones that focus on a new album, but they're still going out there. They're still playing new music and stuff like that. So they believe in this stuff. And I hear that in the music. I respect that. And I'm just, I'm glad that that's where they're at.
Yeah, that's something that I love about the band. I always have, is they are respectful and always concerned about their fandom. That's why they do all these revisit tours that they've done over the years, to give those fans that love that era of the band, still give them something for the band to say, hey, thank you, kind of thing. When they redid the Power Slave tour, they redid the Maiden England tour, that kind of stuff. But then you have a band now that is, you call it the Rob era. To me, that's a really good phrase. But the way I see that, there are two versions of Maiden, and that is, you have the 80s Maiden, and then you have the Rob era. And to me, that is a more mature Maiden, is how I describe it. Where the previous incarnation of the band was not as mature of a sound as it is now. And a lot of people like to say they're more proggy now. I don't consider it proggy. It's just a different sound, yet it still sounds like Iron Maiden. They are just at a different level of writing now. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing if you're willing to accept it. I've followed this band, or this band's, I've basically followed this band since I was 11, 12 years old. And I think that had they always stayed the same, I probably might have left them years ago. This is one of those bands that the fans either, like you say, I only like up to 1988 and screw everything after that. And then you have a lot of new fans now who didn't get into the band till, the late 90s or the 2000s. So to them, the stuff from the past may still be cool, but kind of cliche, where they really have respect for the music.
Yeah, for sure.
But I look at Maiden as pretty much everything. When my life as an adult started, I went on their journey with them, where I look at the early stuff as part of my history, the early Maiden stuff, the 80s Maiden stuff, that's my history. But then when I became an adult, I went on their journey with them, and so when I listen to a new Maiden album, I don't automatically go, oh my God, this does not sound like Number of the Beast. This sucks. If that's what you're expecting, then don't waste your money, because that's not what it's going to be. That's not what this band is about anymore. Can they still do it? Yeah, they prove it every damn tour. They still play a lot of that stuff, but it's one of those bands where either half the fandom wants them to sound like they did back in 1985, and the other half will say it's not different enough. They're not doing anything new. It's either we want it the same, or it sounds old. You can't make everybody happy, and that's the dilemma of a band that's gotten this big. Give it the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Pink Floyd or Rush, or every band that made superstardom, once they get this many albums deep under their belt, there is always going to be that sincere criticism from half your fandom. There's just no making everybody happy. And my advice to anybody, especially with this album, is, you know what? Spend some time with this album by yourself, like what you did on your initial listen. I respect that. I think that's great what you did. You know what? I'm going to go for a walk, just me and the album, and I'm just going to consume. That is what you should do with this, because I think what's happened here is you brought up a really good point too, where there was not a lot of time of prediction by the fandom for this album. Okay, if we knew, okay, this album's going to release in 6 months, you're already building what you want it to sound like, and you're also building what you're expecting it to sound like. And you're already prepping yourself to be disappointed, or you're already prepping yourself to be excited. This album caught everybody off guard. Nobody had time to come to a conclusion before they even heard the damn thing. And so I think Maiden was smart here in the way they did this. And so a lot of people that have bought it have went, whoa, this is a damn good album. Because they didn't have time to be negative. And in the world we live in, especially when it comes to music nowadays, if you give a fan time to be negative, they're going to do it, right? So anyway, I don't want to take up all the time, but
no, you make a lot of great points, and I love what you said about this phase of Iron Maiden. It's also, I think about the 80s phase when I was a teenager and everything, and that was that part of my life, and I'm at a different place in my life too now, and I feel like Iron Maiden is sort of like this old friend that, you sit with your old friends and sometimes reminisce about the goofy things or the things you did when you were 12 or 13, and weren't we crazy back then, and the good times and everything. But then there's also something to be said about a nice deep conversation, that between two adults and stuff like that. And that's sort of I think where Iron Maiden is at, and they've never let their fans down with packaging and the way they present themselves. It's always done in a very high quality way. The video for Writing on the Wall was sort of a surprise, very well done, and did the album, the artwork, and my vinyl hasn't arrived yet, but I've seen plenty of unboxing videos. The vinyl is fantastic. Right. The packaging is, they always put a lot of thought into that. They're always very respectful of the fans in that sense of like giving them a good quality product.
Always get your money's worth with Maiden.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I just keep coming back to this thing that I just really feel like that this is an honest album. This is where they are at right now in their musical lives and their musical careers. And I respect that. I'd rather have them kind of do that, show me, hey, this is who we are right now at this moment, rather than like, hey, let's pretend like we're 22 years old again and we're, angry young lads and we're putting out the first Iron Maiden album or something. As much as I love all that stuff, it's cool to have it evolve and to have it change and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, for those people that, I only love, the 1988 and prior, even for myself, I do love that stuff. That's where it started. That was the magic time. That was the honeymoon. Right. That was the when you first started dating the girl and then you married her. Right. That's that phase. Right. This era of Maiden is now you've bought the house and you're building, you've built the family and now you're, right. That's kind of how I see it. Well, that honeymoon phase and whatnot, I mean, that era of Maiden, if I want to hear that, like if I wanted this to sound like that, why would I buy it when I can just put that on? Right. All my memories and all my good feelings and happy times are with those songs. So
it's a fool's errand to try to replicate. Whenever a band tries to do that, it almost never works. And it's just better to, to just evolve. And it's still Iron Maiden. You have all the signature things there. It's moved on. It's evolved. It's, for me, it's not like it's a totally different band or something where I listen to it and it's like, I don't even recognize this band. We're not like we're talking about Genesis in the 80s compared to Genesis in the 70s, Peter Gabriel. Or Genesis, like, is this the same band? It sounds like just two completely different worlds apart. It's not like that at all. It just sounds
like take like Metallica Load versus Ride the Lightning.
Yeah, right.
It's just the same band.
Right.
But yeah, that is the one thing about Maiden is, I mean, you got to look, this band's been going for 47 years. They're doing something right. I mean, there's not many bands can do that. And even with this album, and I'm going to throw it out there now, a week has been a good digesting period, and I will go on a limb and say this is a better album than Book of Souls, hands down, period.
Yeah.
But it still sounds like Maiden. That is the cool thing about this band is they have gone and tried different things in different directions, like you say, yet they always have kept their sound, and whether it's Steve writing or it's Bruce writing or hell, even Nico, they sound like Maiden. They have their own sound, and they have managed to be able to experiment and try other things, yet still keep their band's sound, and on this album, one of the most signature Maiden sounds that are always used and what always describes them is the gallop.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. Steve Harris and his triplets, man, right? That's, it's here. It's here, and in fact, I would say that, now my favorite track, I'm a Stratego fan. At first, when that track came out, I was like, okay, that sounds like Maiden. This is okay. It was okay. Now, I think that's my favorite track on the whole record.
Yeah, and when you put it in context, this is always a danger when you have these advanced singles. When I heard it, coming out of the opening number, the title track, right into Stratego, it just worked so well. And I liked Stratego beforehand when it was just the single, but hearing it in the context of the album made me like it even more. And the same thing with Writing on the Wall. I was really kind of lukewarm I kind of liked it, but it was an odd one. It was an odd one to start with. I don't think that they should have opened with that one, but I guess there was a whole theme that they wanted to, with the video and everything. But even that one, and listening to it in the context of the album, it makes much more sense, and it's grown on me a lot. I like it in the album better than I did as a single.
Agreed completely. Yeah, and where it falls in the album, it's in a good spot in the album.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't open it up, it doesn't close it, and it's not totally in the middle. It's like just right. It's the third track. So you have a couple of tracks before that to introduce you to the album, and both those first two are different from each other, so you kind of get a good flavor right away where this album's going to go, and then you go into that track, which is really kind of standalone. Writing on the Wall has its own
thing. Yeah,
it definitely has its own thing.
There's a lot of songs on this album that are kind of like that. I think the album is very well paced, and there's enough variety, different things going on between the songs that even though it's a long album, it keeps you engaged, and it keeps you sort of listening, because there's enough variety going on.
Exactly. And that's, when we were pre-talking before we went live, and you said how when you went on your walk, it was like, wow, was that really 80 minutes? And I wanted to bring that up because that's exactly, I think, why I've been spinning this all week long, both discs, and I agree, it does not feel like 80 minutes. And why is that? Because it's not 80 minutes of the same progressional tracks.
Right.
There is a variety here, from length to style to it's such a variety. It's an Iron Maiden buffet.
Yeah, and I think one. I mentioned earlier that there's three types of Maiden fans. Maiden can do no wrong, people in the middle, and the people that don't like this stuff. And one common complaint about the Rob era of the band is that the songs are too long. And I have said this myself in videos of some of the last couple records, because I do believe that there were times where these songs, they really could have stood to have 1 to 3 minutes trimmed off of them. You go back to some of the, no more lies, no more lies, no more lies, singing it like you don't need to sing it 16 times in a row,
Right.
So but on this one, it seems like they have found, it seems like they were searching to try to figure out how to sometimes make these long songs work. And sometimes it worked on the older albums, and sometimes they just felt like to me personally, some of them overstayed their welcome. But on this one, they just seem, it just works because there's enough, again, variety between the songs and within the songs. Like Death of the Celts is a good example of that. When I saw that coming up in the queue, I was like, okay, here we go. Here comes the 3 long Steve Harris songs. And I was nervous because I thought some of Steve's songs, I got a little bit blasted for this on my channel when I did a review of Book of Souls. And I commented on how the Red and the Black, I love the verse and chorus of that song, but I felt that whole middle section with the guitar solos was just way too many guitar solos. So I was fully in okay, here we go. We're going to get another Red and the Black thing where it's just like a song that feels like it never ends. But there was enough melody. So there's a lot of guitar solos in Death of the Celts. But the difference for me between that and Red and the Black is that you get a guitar solo and then the whole band comes in and everybody's playing like a melody together. And then there's another guitar solo. And then the band comes back in again with another melody. It reminded me a little bit of, a Celtic theme of Thin Lizzy, Roisin and Dubois, where it has all these, Celtic melodies in it. And the other thing too, I want to say too, the guitar solos really jumped out at me on this record. In fact, everybody's playing jumped out at me on this record in the sense that Nico and the guitar, Nico, I don't want to use the word he was restrained, but it just seemed like Nico he picked his spots really, really well. When he did a fills, they were just at the right time, not too much, not too little, just right on the drums. Same thing with the guitar solos. I really felt like I liked the way the guitars were mixed. The guitar solos had kind of a unique sound to the solos. And they just seemed a little extra melodic, a little extra catchy. And that also added to the variety and keeping me engaged in this album. Steve, his bass sounds good on it here. He's got a lot of nice little bass runs here and there. He jumps out at times at you. There's times when Nico jumps out, but it just seems like it's almost like they all went in and said, let's all just be really conscious of what we're doing here and make sure that whatever we do, if it's a fill or a guitar solo, that it really make it count, make sure it's,
make it belong.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. And I really
so just being there, give it reason to be there. And I agree completely. I think this is the best album that Nico has sounded on since Peace of Mind. I think he gets to do more on this record than he has on anything else besides Peace of Mind. Steve's bass tone on this album, Steve's always had that clankety 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 clank, and on here it's almost more of a clang without the at the end. And it's a solid, nice. You can tell it's him, and it's
really nice in the mix.
It really sounds good. And there are some points where you can definitely, you've always been able to pick out Steve. I think he's made sure of that. And I think that's part of the sound. Okay. But there are some golden points on this record where you're like, oh God, that sounded nice right there, without it being overly Philly or overly overdriven, it's just there like with purpose and for flavor. But without being overly done. And somebody brought up, and I know we want to get to this too, but somebody brought up about not liking the production on this record. And this is another problem with Maiden fans and Maiden albums, and especially Kevin Shirley. And, once again, I'm going to open this up by saying that this is a different phase of the band. This is a different phase for music. Okay. The way albums are done today, and I'm not saying everything should be done this way. I'm just saying this is just where it is in the industry, really. It's the way albums are made today. I don't think it's so much purposefully produced to give it that particular sound. I think it's just a product of the industry, so to speak. And it isn't just Maiden. You look at any band and look at anything produced from 2000 forward, and it just has this different produced sound. And to me, it's not that big a deal. I am not a big production freak. We're like, you know, as long as I can hear all the instruments and I can hear what I'm looking for, I'm fine. There's bands that go look at like early Sabbath and think, wow, man, I would love to remix that. But then you hear a remix of it and go, nah, you know, I think I like that original one. You know, there's no happy marriage, it seems to be. And people love to dog production. And unless, I mean, I have a decent sound system, okay? And I have an EQ. And 9 times out of 10, I don't touch anything. I put in the disc or I put on the vinyl, I press play, and I enjoy the damn album. If I want to get funky and technical and really dive deep, I'll start screwing with the EQ and see what I can pull out of a recording. But I'll be honest, half the time I don't even really care. You know, I grew up listening to crap on crappy car stereo speakers that were stuck in with duct tape, and you know, what did I care? You know, I used to listen to cassette tapes on imitation Sony Walkmans with cheap ass earphones that sounded like crap, but they're the most magical memories I have of those records, you know? So to me, I don't think the production's that important. To me, I know there's people that really dive into that stuff, but what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the production of this record?
I'm kind of in the middle on this. Like, usually if Maiden fans have a complaint of this era, it's usually 2 things. The songs are too long and the production. I think what has happened with Iron Maiden, now I will say that I'm very glad that they do not seem to be a participant in the loudness wars. I won't get into super in depth what the loudness wars is, but exactly, it's basically where, for people out there, it's where the dynamic range of the recording is crushed in order to make the recording very loud. That results then in a very fatiguing listen. For instance, I was listening to one of the most recent Accept album, and that is kind of dynamically crushed and it's fatiguing on the ears. And after 30 minutes of it, it sort of gets to you. So I appreciate the fact that Iron Maiden doesn't do that. I think, though, what's happened, I have some memory of reading that when they made Dance of Death, that album suffered some from the loudness wars thing. And Steve was aware of this after the fact or whatever, after the album came out. And he said, that's not going to happen again. And I could be making this up in my head, but I thought I remember reading somewhere where Steve basically said, from A Matter of Life and Death on, that they don't really master their albums. So for those out there who don't know what that means, when a band goes in, I'll do this in a nutshell. The band goes in, they record the album. The guy mixes it, sets all the levels. Usually a mastering engineer is the guy who adds an EQ around everything, matches the levels of the songs and everything like that. So the last so many Iron Maiden records for me, they sound, and this album, I'm okay with it, but it just sounds to me like it lacks just a little bit of it has a little bit of a dull sound to it for me. It lacks a little bit of sparkle. It lacks a little bit of clarity. And it really just sounds to me like you mentioned, you have an EQ in your system. Like all they needed to do was just add a little top end, the mastering engineer add a little bit of sparkle to it. And I know that Kevin Shirley is the guy that gets blamed for this, but Kevin Shirley mixed the Kotzen Smith album that Adrian Smith and Richie Kotzen just did, and that album to me, it makes me think that it's maybe not necessarily Kevin Shirley, that this is the way the band wants these albums to sound. Right. Maybe they're going for, like, if you mentioned the way albums sound now. Well, like Steve is a big Jethro Tull fan, and if you listen to a lot of 70s stuff, that stuff, I don't want to say it's compared to music now, modern metal recordings now, the stuff from the 70s has a softer sound to it. It's not as bright and in your face and jumping out of the speakers. You listen to Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick, or Passion Play, and those albums have, you could say that they're not as high fidelity. Genesis is the same thing. And I was just listening to And the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Those aren't harsh, bright sounding things. They tend to be a little bit, reminds me of older movies that you watch The Godfather, and there's so many scenes where it's so dark in a lot of the scenes, and this is the way a lot of these albums in the 70s, they were a lot kind of warmer. They didn't have as much high end. They were a little bit bassier, softer, rounder sounding. And I think that that's kind of what they're going for.
I've always called that the Steely Dan sound.
Right.
Steely Dan, big 70s jazz rock. They just have that exact sound that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's not an aggressive mix or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It's a very kind of, so I think that that's what they're going for. And I mean, I could stand to have a little bit more sparkle on it. I can't think of a better word to describe it, except that I feel like the upper range of it. Sometimes the guitars get a little bit lost for me. I'm actually okay with the keyboards on this. I know that was another big complaint for a lot of people, was the keyboards. Personally, I like the keyboards. I thought that it added, a texture.
I do too. And
to the album.
It's kind of like I said earlier, where if it fits and it's got a reason, instead of just being there to have keyboards there to make it fuller or something, but to actually add just a hint of flavor in a spot, that kind of thing. That's what I get from their use of keyboards on this record. It's much more of they actually belong where they are, in my opinion.
Somebody just said on here, ditch Pro Tools, go back to analog tape. It sounds like, Maiden is, they recorded it digitally, I'm sure, but they're sort of thinking of it like a 70s album. Probably the albums that Steve is listening to on the way to the studio is like, Genesis Selling England by the Pound and Passion Play by Jethro Tull and Wishbone Ash Argus. I know those are, his biggest influences. And so that's kind of where, Steve they're not trying to make it sound like, a modern recording. They're not, I would be shocked. I would put any amount of money down that they're not sitting there listening to some modern band and saying like, hey, we need our album to sound like it fits in 2021. No, they're not. If anything, they're thinking more like, hey, here's the stuff that we like, Wishbone Ash and Jethro Tull and the 70s stuff. Let's make an album that sounds like that. And for that, I applaud them. I mean, I would give the mix an 8 out of 10 if I was just giving the production, a rating. I'd give it a 7.5 and 8 out of 10, which is certainly acceptable. It's not distracting to me. It doesn't take away from the music. Would I have liked a little bit more from it? Yeah, but there's some people out there that just think it's just an awful mess. I know some people felt like the vocals get a little bit lost in the mix at times, and that might be true. And for me, again, that's the clarity sparkle thing that I'm missing. That's why it only gets a kind of an 8 out of 10 for me. Sometimes things do get a tad bit sort of lost get a little muddy at times, and I do lose what's going on sometimes. But I'll take it. I'll take that over some modern record that sounds like it's just brick walled and it's bright and harsh. And, you listen to 20 minutes of it and you feel like your ears have been flattened. I'll take what Iron Maiden's doing any day of the week.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot going on here. You have, Maiden is now a large band. Okay, you have 3 guitars, bass, vocals, drums, keyboards, sound effects. There's some explosions in here, things like that. So you have a lot that you're trying to put together. You have Bruce, who I think on this record, you're looking at a man that, known as the air raid siren, yes, but that's not where he is anymore. He can't, I would say Bruce is very mid-range on this album, okay? This isn't, Bruce of somewhere in time and prior. This is Bruce of today. The guy he's been around the block, okay? So, the chords, not to mention the medical issues he had, this is a much more mid-range Bruce Dickinson on this record. And so that kind of sets the tone, I think, for the sound of this record. I've heard some people say, oh, this is a dark record. I don't see it as a dark record. I don't see it as a bright record. I see it as like a mid-range record. The whole thing is a mid-range sound to me. And I get that from the production as well. I don't think it's badly produced. Could it have had some more work done to it? Yeah. Am I going to complain about it though? No.
Yeah, and I'm glad you made a point about Bruce, because that was something else that I saw people sort of commenting on, like, oh, I don't know, just saying they didn't care for Bruce's performance on it, and I actually thought it was great. I think he has sort of this.
I killed to sound like that.
Yeah, well, and I think I like this sort of mid-range in his voice. It has this sort of smoky quality to it at times, and then when he does pop up into the air raid siren thing, it helps elevate the songs. It's like if he's in air raid siren mode all the time, sometimes that works. And in the older material, there goes the sirens, Ace is High and that kind of stuff, where he's just belting for the trooper, take my life, but I'll tell you, he's just up there the whole time. Okay, that works for things like that. But where they are right now, I think that this mid-range, the way he's using the mid-range of his voice, then when he does jump up into the air raid siren range, it makes the song sort of elevate and go up more. To me, it's a more, I like it. And I mean, there's probably, a factor of the age and the medical issues, but it also too just might be, a different approach, a more mature approach that Bruce is taking at this. Yeah, this is what Bruce doesn't need to he doesn't need to prove to anybody that he can sing high anymore. He can sing those high notes anymore. Because he can, and he does, and he does it every tour and everything. So I enjoy the fact that he's mixing it up in his range a little bit more, because it's adding this dynamic to the songs. One other thought, you were mentioning the guitars, and one thing that I noticed that I thought was really interesting, and people have asked me this about, Maiden with 3 guitars. How do you pan the 3 guitars, right? And I noticed on this album that there's a lot of times where when there's just rhythm guitars going on, it's a guitar in the left and a guitar in the right. And it makes, and in the past, they would often have that 3rd guitar sort of floating in the middle somewhere, like maybe it'd be 1 o'clock or something in the stereo spectrum. But there's a lot of times on this album where it just sounds like 2 rhythm guitars. And then what happens is, and I don't know if maybe they said to themselves, you know what? the 3 guitars playing rhythm live, that adds a lot of beef and heft to the sound. But if we don't need it, we're not going to add it. Or if they just took that 3rd guitar and just panned it heavy to one or the other channel and just blended it to make it sound like one guitar. But the effect is that the bass and the drums sit really nice. And then when the keyboards jump in, or when an extra guitar does jump in with a little harmony line, or maybe the chorus comes around and all of a sudden another rhythm guitar jumps in, it makes the song lift a little bit. And it gives you this variety within the music. And that's something that I found really engaging. As I was listening to the songs there, I was just finding moments where, oh, there's this like keyboard line that just came in on the 2nd verse, or here's this extra guitar that came in halfway through the verse. Or there were just like little things sort of jumping in here and there that kept me really engaged in the music, rather than this just sort of constant 3 guitars, 1 in the middle, everything just, that's it. There were little things jumping in and out, and I really appreciated that. And I think that's why I like the keyboards too. Typically, Maiden keyboards during this era, I don't really notice them unless I'm listening for them, you know. But on this album, they jumped out for me, but in a good way. Like, you know, all of a sudden they'd go into a pre-chorus and there'd be a keyboard line that just made everything feel like it lifted up and like it went somewhere. Right. And it kept me engaged. Yep,
I agree completely. That's what I mean by this. It's like they were put there for a reason. They belong not just to be there, not just, you know, like most bands would go, oh, we just want to use keyboards to add some flavor or something like that. There was a reason, I think, that they put them where they put them. You know, this album, it's such a variety. You know, the more I think about it, there is even the long songs, okay? And I still really, I would say probably Darkest Hour is probably the one that's probably my least favorite.
Really?
Okay? Yeah.
Wow. That's one of my favorites on the record.
And I'm hearing that from a lot of people.
Because I like Bruce in that zone. I love when Bruce does these mid-tempo. Reminds me of his solo stuff like Tears of the Dragon, when Bruce does these sort of dramatic, the chorus comes up and it's just this big. Here's an example of Bruce going up into that range then, and it's just these. I'm a sucker for big hooks and big choruses. And Bruce is really good at that kind of songwriting, you know, like on Final Frontier, you know, coming home, da da da, you know, it's just like these big choruses. And to me, that's what that one is. And the lyrics in that song and everything, I'll tell you, you know, with everything that Bruce has been through, when I heard that for the first time, I almost felt a little like emotional or something. I almost got a little like choked up thinking about everything that Bruce has been through. And like, you know, we're sitting here, not to get all sort of morbid or anything, but you know, we're at this point where how many more Iron Maiden albums are we going to get? You know what I mean? And when there was just something about Darkest Hour that really struck a chord with me. And I really loved Bruce's delivery on that. So
cool. That's, you know, this may change, right? You know, but for me, out of the whole album, you know, and I'm not saying it's a bad song by any means. It's just probably down on the list. And I think it's just because there's so many times I like slow Maiden. You know what I mean? Or would you even call it ballady Maiden, right? And this one just seems to kind of go on for a while for me. But out of the long tracks, Hell on Earth, you know, I said this initially, and still that is my favorite out of the Harris Wrights on here. The one that's probably grown on me the most was The Time Machine. And then the one that just kind of struck me as odd, and I'm still not sure where I sit with it still, is The Lost in a Lost World, where Bruce he's running some kind of an effect on his voice on that track.
Yeah.
And that kind of took me, that's the one thing, if there's one thing I had to pick out on this album that is definitely different for Maiden, that is like, well, that's new for Maiden. It's that. I've never known Bruce to use some kind of oddball.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
You know? And it's not that it's bad. I think it's just I'm having to come to terms with a new Maiden sound, you know?
Yeah. It's funny. So for me, Hell on Earth and Time Machine are the ones that, I mean, I like them, but they haven't quite clicked for me yet. And I know a lot of people have commented that they really like Hell on Earth, and it hasn't really, I mean, I like it, but I like much better Death of the Celts and the Parchment, and Hell on Earth just hasn't clicked for me yet. And it's not the album ender and last song on the album that I quite wanted. Maybe it's because Book of Souls ended with Empire of the Clouds, which was so epic and grand and everything, that I was just sort of expecting something like that here. And like you said, maybe it's a grower, you know, it's one that's going to have to grow on me.
You know, when it comes to those long tracks, you know, the Maiden long songs, right, and whatnot, I think, and that Steve's pretty much known for those. You know, you got to go back to, I think what I've always considered part of the reason for that is, you know, the first time they did that, it was such a big deal and it went over so well, you know, with Rime of the Ancient Mariner. That was the first big, you know, Maiden track, you know, over 10 minutes, and it was this big extravaganza and with such success. And I think they've always tried to kind of hunt for that again. And, you know, I don't have a problem with the long Maiden tracks at all. Empire of the Clouds is actually a little long for me, but I normally don't have a problem with them. So I don't understand why there's so much distaste for those, as long as they have variety in the track, and most of them do. I don't see, you know, it'd be different if you were to take something like The Trooper and go, okay, we're going to play The Trooper for 15 minutes or 17 minutes nonstop. You know, that's not what I see with their long tracks, but some people just don't like them at all. So, and everything on here I actually like, and they're all different from each other too. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
There you go.
That's a good point. There's enough variety between the songs, and there's enough variety within the songs. And my complaint with the long songs in the past, I think I already talked about The Red and the Black. I'm going to keep going back to that it's a song that there's not enough variety in that middle section. It just sounds like guitar solos, endless guitar solos. It's not like there's melodies, really catchy melodies. Whereas in Death of the Celts, there's guitar solos, but it's like guitar solo, and then the band comes in and plays a melody, and then another guitar solo, and then another melody. So that was always my thing in the past. Sometimes choruses going on too long, or just things, every song starting slow. You know, it felt like you go back on some of their albums, and this is just like this formula, slow intro, and then the song starts building up. And, you know, it's just something that maybe if they had a producer that had, you know, maybe a stronger opinion or more control over the band, you know, might say like, hey guys, you know, you have too many songs on this record that start the same way. You got to, but here on this album, I don't know what it is. I think it's the variety, like we keep saying, and just the way the album is paced and everything. And you mentioned Lost, I just forgot the title, Lost in a Lost World. You know, little things like the effects on the vocal and the guitar in the beginning is kind of a unique guitar sound. For Iron Maiden, there's some kind of, I don't know if that's a clean guitar with an effect on it too. That, you know, just there's just enough different little things going on that I don't know, it just seems to work better on this record for me. It's like they seem to have figured it out in a way. It's like, how can we do these long songs and what we're trying to do, but still make it really keep people engaged and keep it interesting. I mean, I'll be honest, when I saw 82 minutes, I was like, whoa, I hope I can get through this, because in the past, it always took me time, and I had to take these Iron Maiden albums in chunks because there was always so much going on. But this one, you know, I got to the end of the 82 minutes and I was like, wow, it's over. You know, like, wow,
feels like half
that. It just went by really quick for me. So I think that's a strength of the album. And let's face it, I probably lost the comment on here. It said something like, he said, what percentage of fans who have been there since the early days would prefer the new album over the old? Yeah, there's a certain percentage of people, but those people don't like anything after Seventh Son of the Seventh Son or Somewhere in Time. You know, if that's the only era of Iron Maiden that you like, you're not going to accept this.
Might accept one track on here.
Yeah, Stratego, or you know, something that's a real classic sounding thing. But it's a different thing now, and it has to sort of be approached. You have to almost listen to Iron Maiden in a different way now than how you would have, you know, with an album like Killers or something.
You do. I mean, you cannot take Iron Maiden's first album and listen to that and then turn around and listen to Book of Souls and expect the same thing out of Book of Souls. Right. You can't listen to Number of the Beast and then listen to Seventh Son even. And those are even closer together. Look how different those two records are, right? I mean, this isn't new for Maiden. They've been changing their entire career. You know, they started off with you know, Paul and being more, you know, they've always been cliched as punky, right? But that is a completely rawer sound on those first two records than even Number of the Beast. And then, although I would put those two, probably the two closest albums together Maiden's ever done are the first two.
Yeah.
It was in Number of the Beast that they then found a new singer in Bruce and a whole new sound. Okay. And then even with Peace of Mind, back to Number of the Beast, those are two completely different records. And if you really look and you're honest with yourself, especially as a Maiden fan, be honest with yourself, every Maiden record has sounded completely different than anything they've done before. Okay? When they did Somewhere in Time, people threw up arms like, what the hell, Maiden? What are you doing with keyboards?
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know how many people love that freaking record now?
Yeah,
you know?
For sure.
You know how many people I know that call Seventh Son their favorite record? You know? And
and if anything, people, like I've mentioned, that this album, if anything, it sort of harkens back at moments to the Blaze era, certain touches, little touch points to the Blaze era. I think, you know, if there's any, you know, sound of them going back a little bit, it's maybe I'm not sure how to describe it, but it just seems like there are some moments that touch on where they were a little bit in the Blaze era.
You know, the Blaze era, what's so cool about that is, number one, I am a fan of the Blaze era. I don't dog that at all. When X Factor came out, to me, I needed that record in my life at the time when that album came out. So it's a little special to me. But the cool thing about those tracks is on the last tour, when I saw Maiden and they played some songs off those records, you hear how Maiden those records really are. When you hear Bruce sing those songs, they are so Bruce songs. I mean, they are straight up Maiden tracks without a doubt. And that's the cool part of that, is now I've got two options, right? I can either listen to it live with Bruce singing and listen to him in a whole new light, or I can still listen to him with Blaze singing and I still appreciate them for what they are, you know? But hearing Bruce sing those songs really opened my eyes to go, wow, no, those are really Maiden tracks. I mean, you know, it made me bring X Factor and Virtual 11 into the discography a little more comfortably than I used to, you know. But, you know, I wish people would really look at, I remember when Final Frontier came out and that album getting bashed all to hell. And people just need to realize that if you're really honest with yourself and you go back through the entire Maiden catalog, outside of the first two records, every album has been a completely new sound and new step for this band. Okay, so for everyone that buys a new Maiden record when it comes out and says this is too different, this is too, go back and have a little conversation with yourself about which ones you really like and why.
For sure, I agree.
Cool. So for me, I'm going to say I absolutely love this album. I think this is definitely, I'm not ready to rank it in the discography yet because it's still growing on me. And I don't think that's fair to do so. So, but I can say this, I am thoroughly enjoying it. I've definitely got my money's worth. Thank you, Iron Maiden, for still going. And thank you, Iron Maiden, for creating a great record, for those that don't like it, I feel for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. For me, I'm not ready to rank it yet, but I'll say that in the Return of Bruce era, it's ranking, it's feeling like it's going to sit pretty high for me. In their entire catalog, I'd have to really think about that. And like you,
Bruce era record.
Well, it's going to be one of the classics, probably.
Or what is your favorite Return of Bruce era record?
Okay, Rob era, probably A Matter of Life and Death, or Brave New World. Those would be, before this album, my top two. Now with this one, I don't think it's going to be my favorite from the Rob era, but it's going to be in the top three. I'm not sure where it's going to sit. It's either going to probably be number 2 or number 3. Depending on my mood, it's either Brave New World or A Matter of Life and Death. But this album is definitely, it's up there. And like you mentioned, I'm very. This came at a really good time for me personally, with everything going on in the world, to have a band like Iron Maiden, who I've spent so much time with, come out with an album like this that I can enjoy as much as I'm enjoying it. I'm just very grateful that, I think back to the bands that are closest to my heart, the bands that I've grown up with since I was the 10-year-old me, which is AC/DC, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, Dio, and Ozzy. And the fact that Iron Maiden, one of those core bands for me, is putting out an album that I'm so engaged with, and I'm enjoying this much at this point, 40 years later, is something that really makes me happy, and I'm really grateful that they're out there doing what they're doing.
Well said, man. Well said, and I agree completely. I like to, pretty much everybody every year goes, oh, here's my album of the year kind of thing, and I know that to many Maiden fans, before they even hear the album, they're going to go, oh, it's going to be Iron Maiden's album. That's Maiden, and that's where it's supposed to go, right? But I think I can honestly say that this is probably going to be album of the year, and not just because it's an Iron Maiden record, but because for what the record is. I think I go back. I think what's really done it is I'm going to go back to what I said initially on how this album was released, and that is that it caught. It is. I actually checked before we went on video, and this album is number 1 in the U.S. right now in sales, and it's also number 1 in the U.K. right now in sales. Okay. This is a band that has never had radio support, very little video MTV support, and that was even back in the day.
Right.
But nowadays, here's a band that releases a record with no promotional material outside of maybe, what was it, a month to 2 months prior to release? Right?
Yeah. And it's really only promoted within the metal
social media
and world. It's not like they're popping up on Jimmy Kimmel Live, or
they're not doing a special spot on American Idol, right?
Right. Exactly.
So this is a band that still to this day, on 47 years of their existence, will sell out a 20,000 seat stadium by just saying, we're going to play on this date. Tickets go on sale this time, and it sells out that day. This is the band that can do that. So there's a reason why.
Yeah, there's not many bands at this point that can generate this kind of excitement. Metallica would be one of them. Priest, when they put out a new album. Iron Maiden, AC/DC, when they put out a new album. But it's really only a handful of bands, I think, that can generate quite this level of excitement. I mean, people are interested when Megadeth puts out a new album and bands like that, but it's not quite at the level of Iron Maiden. And if you look at it, I was pleasantly surprised to see, and gosh, this was like a week ago when I looked at this, the Writing on the Wall video has like 11 million views on it, which is really impressive for, there's other bands that, big-ish size bands that they'll put out a video and maybe it gets, if they're lucky, 400,000, 250,000 views or something. I mean, 11 million views for their video. That's pretty cool. That tells me that there was a lot of excitement around it. I watched it when it premiered, and there was probably 250,000 people watching it live. There's another thing, the way they premiered the video. I was glued to my TV like a 12-year-old, waiting. I was like watching the little countdown thing. I had a bunch of friends in Facebook Messenger, and we're all like, I got my friend in Sweden. He's up at 3:00 in the morning to watch it, or I think it premiered in like the afternoon or something. I don't remember now, but I just had people from all over the world, and we're just all on Facebook, getting all excited.
Here we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's
what going back to the video that you did. What bands can do that? Can create that majesty, that majestic thrill of
mystique.
Yeah, and it's I'm going to say this is I've seen every Maiden tour since Peace of Mind, except for X Factor and Virtual 11, and only because they were canceled. And every time I have seen this band since, I'm going to say, Seventh Son, I have looked at, this could be the last time I see Maiden. Every time I've gone, I say to myself, this could be the last time I see Maiden. Okay, and when I saw them last year, I said to myself, this is probably the last time I'm going to see Maiden. And then this album drops out of nowhere. And given if the world can hold itself together, we might get another tour. I don't know. I'm hoping so. But I will say that I know with Book of Souls, I thought this is probably the last Maiden record. I think a lot of people thought that, So, for those that are that just want to automatically be negative towards a release or something, you got to think how thankful you should be that this is even in existence. Okay. But on top of that, how good it really is if you give it the chance. And, get past the, I'm not sure if I like the production, or, gee, I don't know, Bruce kind of, I don't know, or 3 guitars, or 11 minutes, or, you know what? Get yourself some headphones, get in a room by yourself, put this thing in, and digest the record, and you're going to walk out going, that was worth 80 minutes of my life.
Yeah, don't go in with any preconceived notion like, okay, I'm hoping that it's going to be this, or I'm hoping that it's going to be that. Just kind of put it on, listen to it.
Just accept what comes out of it.
Yeah, and judge it on its own sort of merits, rather than comparing it to. And I think when you do that, it's, I don't know, there's a lot of rewards to be found inside this record.
Yes, there is. And this is something that I hope other bands prick their ears up and take notice of what Maiden did here with this, because I think, typical with Maiden, we're going to think out of the box, and we're going to go about something in a different way, and it works for them. Whether it's musically, marketing, whatever. This band always tries something different, and it always works for them somehow. And who knows? Maybe this is how bands are going to start releasing records. They're just not going to say anything.
Yeah, hats off to Iron Maiden for embracing the new technology. Iron Maiden their website is very well run. They know how to embrace the technology, like the YouTube live premiere and everything. And you're right. I know that there's other bands. Like, I'm going to see Judas Priest tomorrow night, and I did you notice that, like, a couple of days ago on Blabbermouth, Rob Halford came out and said something like, "Oh, we've got like about 2 albums worth of material written." Yeah. I thought, the timing on this is really interesting because, a lot of people are talking about, everybody's talking about Iron Maiden, and Judas Priest has to be kind of sitting in the back. I'm sure they're watching and they're going, okay, this is what Maiden put out there. We got to make sure that, the bar's been raised to here. We got to make sure that we're,
Maiden and Priest. I've always said it. Maiden and Priest is the Beatles and Stones of metal, man.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure they're aware of each other.
Oh, absolutely.
And they got to be thinking. I can't help but think when Rob threw that out, it was just kind of like, hey, everybody, don't forget that we're out here too, and we're working on stuff too, and we're going to have something coming up in the near future. So yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, hopefully Iron Maiden raises the bar for everybody.
What I would like to see, I'm going to go out on a limb here. This is on a completely different tangent, but when the time comes that Steve decides to take off the Fender P bass for the final time, right? Unplug it for the final time, and Maiden says, "This is the last tour," and I don't mean like Kiss 5 times later. Right. I mean, the real, this is the last tour. I would love to see them invite Paul Di'Anno out on stage with them and do some true reunited, let's do it for the fans.
And even Blaze. And I think that Maiden would.
The whole Maiden family, man. Bring the whole Maiden family together.
They're not a band that, writes off certain eras of their history. And proof of that is the fact that Bruce gets up there and sings stuff from the Blaze era.
Yeah.
So they embrace all eras of the band. And and I hope that whatever their final tour is, I hope that they're able to go out on their terms, that they're able to say that this is their final tour. I hope it isn't, because God forbid something happens to one of the guys in the band or something like that, and all of a sudden it's just like, all right, that was it. That was it. And I hope that they're able to have a farewell tour, like you're talking about, because it would be something really special, and it would certainly be emotional, knowing especially if they bring out Paul Di'Anno maybe for, the last half of the concert. Paul comes out and sings a few songs, maybe Blaze comes out and sings a few songs, and there's just sort of a goodbye from Maiden, thing.
I think, if I were to have my unicorn moment, last Maiden show, right? The final show. The final song. Maiden has always, as encore, played Iron Maiden, right? That's their encore track, right? Well, now they have like 3 or 4, but Iron Maiden is always like the final song. Paul comes out and sings that for the last time with the band for the last track. And I'm not trying to take anything from Bruce, because we all know Bruce is the man, right? He is Maiden, right? But because that's almost like coming full circle, right? To where it started to finally end it on that track with that singer, I think would just be totally special and be a cool way to do it. So, Steve Harris, if you're watching my video, there you go. That's what you do.
You heard it here first, Steve.
Yeah, you heard it here. But yeah, no, I like exactly what you just said, Jeff, and that's exactly what I was trying to say, and that is that people should stop being, what'd you say, pick bitches and be happy that something new is coming out. you know, and that's exactly it. I think we've gotten to a point, especially in the metal genre, where we have become so spoiled and picky, you know, in many ways, and not as much thankful as we should be. You know, we have a lot to choose from now. You know, there's a lot of fans out there. There's, you know,
that's a good point. That if you're somebody, I'm never going to tell somebody what they should like and what they shouldn't like. And if you're somebody who only likes the 80s stuff, that's cool. You've got that. You've got that stuff there. So let the people who enjoy what's coming out now enjoy that. There's a place for everybody here. There's a place for, and you know, I'll also say this too, that it's okay for people to have opinions and for people to, you know, to criticize something in a constructive way.
Yes.
When you say, if somebody says to me, hey, you know what, I mean, I like this album, but just some of the songs are a little too long for me. Okay, I can understand why somebody might feel that way, or you know, maybe something about the production. I can understand that. But when somebody just, it sucks.
Oh, Maiden just sucks now because
right. It's just
because they're not my Maiden now.
Right,
you know?
right, exactly. It's just being. You know, to me, that's just being a little bit silly, and you're not giving it a chance. And you know, there's plenty to pick from now. We're lucky with Iron Maiden that if you're a fan of the 80s, you got a lot of amazing albums to pick from. If you dig the new era of the band, you got a lot of great albums to pick from there too. And then you got stuff in between to choose from also. So it's, you know, a lot out there.
Well, guys, so I think it's fair to say that both John and I both are supporters of this album and enjoy it quite a bit. I definitely put it up there in the Rob era. I like that term. I definitely, you know, my favorite Rob era album. I know most people would definitely go with Brave New World. I think is the most common favorite. My favorite is actually Dance of Death. I love that record.
Interesting.
I love that record. But yeah, Brave New World, Dance of Death, and probably Senjutsu is where I would put it right now. But
nice.
It's definitely in the top 3, I think, for me. But that's now. It's still only, you know, it's still young. It's still only a week old. It could go higher, you know. I might revisit Final Frontier one day and have something click there and go, oh my God. You know, I've had that happen before too, you know, especially with Maiden. Songs that used to just be kind of mediocre to me all of a sudden become a nonstop spin for a month, you know. I've had that happen. So
absolutely,
the beauty of the band and the beauty of music and the beauty of metal. But so any final thoughts, John? What do you got to say to Maiden fans out there that are on the fence with this record?
Give it a chance, you know, just go into it with an open mind. I think there's a lot to enjoy here. So it's a, you know, again, I think Maiden made a lot of people happy with this one and with everything going on in the world. I think that's, you know, to have something positive like this come around and give us all something to talk about. And it's cool. If you don't like it, you know, if it's not for you, that's cool. You know, it's okay. We all have our own thoughts and we all have our own likes and everything. And, but it's all metal in the end. We're all here for the same reason, because we're all heavy metal. We love heavy metal. We love Iron Maiden. So.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for showing up and watching and following us along while we rant away about this record. And John, thank you again for coming on the show, buddy. It's always a pleasure now. I feel like I'm really getting to know you. I feel like I already know you because I've watched all your videos. But
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining me on the new release of Iron Maiden Senjutsu. Go out, get it, spend some time with it. You're going to love it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for watching. We're going to see you next time.